Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Deuteronomy, the 33rd chapter. And this deals with the blessings, okay? And the final blessing in which Moses blessed the tribes, okay, the various tribes. And, as we go through it, some of them are pretty general, right? But we end up seeing, at different points in time when the Lord brings these blessings to fruition upon the various tribes. A part of those blessings also help you identify, who they are today, similar to how the curses help you identify who the tribes are today. So this is the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 33, verse 1. And this is the blessing wherewith Moses, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel before his death. And he said, the Lord came from Sinai and rose up from Seir unto them. And when you go into that rose up, it means to make him to appear, right? To make himself appear unto them, unto who? To Israel. He shined forth from Mount Paran, which is that region over there in which they were in the wilderness. And he came with 10,000 of saints, or 10,000s of saints. And who are the saints? The Israelites. From his right hand went a fiery law for them. That law being the commandments, right, in which the Lord etched into stone for Moses, right, to bring to the people. Yea, he loved the people. All his saints are in thy hand, and they sat down at thy feet. Every one shall receive of thy words. And I'm going to read this in the NLT as well, as it makes the pronouns a bit clearer. In the NLT, it says, indeed, he loves his people. All his holy ones are in his hands. They follow in his steps and accept his teaching or his instruction. All right, and he being the Lord. Moses commanded us a law, even the inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. Right, so the Lord, gave Moses the instructions by which he taught and commanded the children of Israel in the laws, the statutes, the commandments, the customs, and even the division of their inheritance amongst them, all right, of the congregation of Jacob or the Israelites. And he was king in Jeshurun, which Jeshurun is another name for Israel, when the heads of the people and the tribes of Israel were gathered together. Right, and ultimately that's the role he played, right, as he led them, and, basically ruled them, all right, and led them throughout that whole journey. Let Reuben live and not die, and let not his men be few. So now, as Moses is going into these blessings here, which, jumping back up to verse 5 for a bit, when you when you look at some of these other translations here, where are we at? Like the NLT here, I didn't go to it because they insert the Lord in there, right? And some of the other translations also decipher the pronoun he here to be referring to the Most High, which we know the Most High was already king, right, over Israel. But in this context, this is Moses, right, as he was, even though not officially coronated, the Lord chose him, right, and he was in the stead of a king or ruler over Israel, all right, called here as Jeshurun, at the point in which you had the gathering of the people, okay, as he gathered them through the Spirit of the Lord from Egypt and led them all throughout that wilderness. And one of the reasons I say that is when you go into the actual Hebrew, you'll see here the Lord's name doesn't show in here. So in the translations where they add it, it's to it's for them. It's how they, when they were translating it, they made sense of the pronoun he as to be referring to the Most High. But when you go into the Hebrew, you'll see it says Wayahaya, right? And he was Ba Yashar one, right? In Jeshurun, Malak, king. So, and he was king in Jeshurun. And then it goes on from there. So dealing with that first part, and he was king, that's how it is in the Hebrew, right? It doesn't specify that the pronoun here is referring to the Most High. So continuing in verse 6, now the blessings begin. It says, let Reuben live and not die, and let not his men be few. Okay, and this was a blessing for, Reuben, in the sense of, them growing, right? Them being populous and not diminishing. Okay, let them not die off, let them grow, let them be fruitful. Because if his men, meaning his descendants, be not few, then what would they be? There would be plenteous, right? So that was a blessing in which Moses blessed Reuben. Verse 7, and this is the blessing of Judah. And he said, hear, Yahweh, the voice of Judah, right? So hearken unto Judah and bring him unto his people. Let his hands be sufficient for him, which the hands are symbolic also of a power, okay? So let his power suffice. Let his power be sufficient. When you go into that word sufficient, it's also, like a sense of being great. Okay, mighty. Let's go into that word. Rob, right? Much, many, greater than, right? Exceedingly. Okay. So I'll go through it and I'll read it in another translation as well, for a bit more clarity. As it says, and be thou an help to him from his enemies, right? So guard him, strengthen him, hear him, right? Hear his cry, and protect him, okay, from his enemies. So it says here in the NLT, and in the NIV as well. It says, Moses said this about the tribe of Judah, O Lord, hear the cry of Judah, and bring them together as a people. Give them strength to defend their cause. Help them against their enemies. Okay. So continuing on in verse 8, and of Levi he said, let thy Thummim and thy Urim be with thy Holy One. And the Thummim and the Urim were sacred lots, right? Stones that were used to determine the voice of the Lord, right? The answer of the Lord when Israel would inquire. Okay, and so as it says, as Moses said here, let those be with thy Holy One, here being Levi, the tribe of Levi, whom thou didst prove at Massa, and with whom thou didst strive at the waters of Meribah. Okay, and here meaning Levi, who you tested, right? You tested and you tried at Massa and at Meribah. And these were points in our journey in the wilderness. And when it says strive here, it's not more so in the sense of like to fight with, but to also to test as well, because in the wilderness at these locations, it wasn't only the tribe of Levi that was being tested of the Lord. Okay. And when the Lord was, striving, for lack of a better word, between Israel and him, as they would murmur against him and defy him, Levi were shown or proven to be loyal to the Lord. Okay, and that's what leads into verse 9, when it says, who said to his father and to his mother, being Levi, that is, I have not seen him. And when you go into that word seen, okay, I believe it's ra'ah. One of the definitions is to regard. Okay, so I have not seen, or ra'ah, to see, to consider, right, to regard, to give attention to. So it's saying here of the tribe of Levi, basically they didn't regard their father or their mother, neither did he acknowledge his brethren, nor knew his own children. For they have observed thy word and kept thy covenant. And what Moses is saying here is not that they just didn't care about anybody. What it means is that they didn't put anybody before the Lord. Okay? They They didn't regard their father or mother or their brethren or their own children above the Lord. They put the Lord first. Hence, they observed his word and kept his commandment. And one example here is when we cross-reference this, you'll notice when Moses came down from the mountain, right? There it is. I'll read it here. When he came down from the mountain and he was angry at the fact that Israel had worshipped that idol. Okay, this is what transpired. Exodus 32 and 25. And when Moses saw that the people were naked, for Aaron had made them naked unto their shame among their enemies. And this was basically, they had covered themselves with sin, right, by transgressing and worshiping the idol. Then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, "Who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me." And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together unto him. And he said unto them, "Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, put every man his sword by his side, and go in and out from gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay every man his brother, and every man his companion, and every man his neighbor." And all the children of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and there fell of the people that day about 3,000 men. See, so, as a matter of fact, I'll finish it at 29. For Moses had said, "Consecrate yourselves today to the Lord, every man upon his son and upon his brother, that he may bestow upon you a blessing this day." So what this means is when Levi went throughout the camp and they were slaying these Israelites, the wicked ones, that is, that were all for this idol worshiping, when it says his brother and his companion and so on, it means that, it means those wicked Israelites. But in this case, Levi slew them regardless of whether they were their relatives or their close of kin. If they were a part of that group that was spearheading that idol worshiping, they were slain. So this was an example here where Levi basically put by, okay, their loved ones and put first the Lord. Okay, as we just read here in verse 9, for they observed thy word and kept thy covenant above any regard for anybody else. Verse 10, they shall teach Jacob thy judgments and Israel thy law. They shall put incense before thee and whole burnt sacrifice upon thine altar, right? Which is going into them bearing the service of the tabernacle, right? And the ordinances concerning sacrifices and incense and so on before the Lord. Bless Yahweh his substance, that is Levi's substance, and accept the work of his hands. Smite through the loins of them that rise against him. Okay, so wound severely, right, unto death, those that would come against Levi, and of them that hate him, that they rise not again. Meaning the Lord would be a defense, right, in strengthening Levi and defending them against their adversaries or their foes. And this is a blessing that Moses put upon that tribe, of which we can find many instances of this taking place. But overall, this is what that blessing was. And of Benjamin, he said, the beloved of the Lord Yahweh shall dwell in safety by him. Right? Benjamin, which in the Hebrew is Banyamyan, meaning son of the right. Okay, as it says here, beloved of the Lord shall dwell safely by him, and the Lord shall cover him all the day long. That cover meaning to shield. And he shall dwell between his shoulders, meaning he's going to dwell close by to the Lord, being shielded and protected. All right. And that is a blessing that Moses put upon Benjamin. Now, what's also interesting as well is, a thought that came to mind. And I always, sort of thought about this over the years whenever I would read that instance or that story in the book of Judges, where you had those wicked Benjamites, the sons of Belial, that ended up assaulting, the whole night, the concubine of the priest, of the Levite, right, until she eventually died. And when Israel assembled themselves to go against Benjamin, interestingly enough, this was one tribe against the rest of the 11, and yet they defeated, right? They defeated the men of Israel twice on two accounts, in which the Lord said, go up and fight them, and they went up and they lost, cooked. Then they fasted, they got upset. They went and they prayed to the Lord. He said, go up again. They went up and got cooked. And then the Lord finally decided to, give them into the hands of Benjamin, or give Benjamin into their hands, right, through a strategy. But it was always interesting, how it is that they, had so much strength, or had the upper hand, right, against all 12, even though they were in the wrong, right? You would think the first go around, the Lord would just easily give them up, but the Lord does everything for a reason anyway, but continuing on, verse 13, and of Joseph, he said, now Joseph here, as we'll see in verse 17, this is applying to Ephraim and Manasseh. So it says, because the blessing of Joseph would go to his sons. Blessed of the Lord Yahweh be his land, for the precious things of heaven, for the dew, and for the deep that coucheth beneath. So they would be blessed. Their land would be blessed. It would be fruitful. They would have an abundance because of the dew of heaven, because of the rain, and the water, okay, that they would have, which would, they would be able to use to nurture themselves and the land. Okay, and this means, and most lands have that, right? They have, they require water and rain, but for the habitations where the descendants of Joseph would dwell, all right, be it during the time when they were in the land or even after, for that period of time or for a certain period of time, the Lord would bless them to where they would have an abundance where in their habitation. And for the precious fruits brought forth by the sun, and for the precious things put forth by the moon. Okay, so the precious fruits, right, the crops and so on, brought forth by the sun. I'll read this in the NKJV as well. But it says, with the precious fruits of the sun, right, because you do need the sun, but it's kind of like by day. Okay, their land yielding to them, the precious fruits and good quality crops. The second part, it says, with the precious produce of the months, right? Because that's what the moon signifies, months. It's used to tell time, but by months. So it's like a constant nourishing or a constant abundance in the fruits of the land that they would enjoy. And for the chief things of the ancient mountains, and for the precious things of the lasting hills. Okay, let's read that in another translation as well. In the NKJV, it says, with the best things of the ancient mountains, with the precious things of the everlasting hills. In the NLT, with the finest crops of the ancient mountains, and the abundance from the everlasting hills. And for the precious things of the earth, and fullness thereof, and for the goodwill of him that dwelt in the bush. And the precious things of the earth are all the good things the earth can yield onto them, right? From crops to, minerals to, natural resources to gold, silver, diamond, like all these things that the earth could yield to them, they would enjoy that. That was their blessing. And as it says, and the fullness thereof, and for the goodwill of him that dwelt in the bush. So they would gain, be blessed by the goodwill, or the good favor by him that dwelt in the bush, which is the Most High. And Moses was referring to the one that dwelt in the burning bush, right? When he first met Moses. Okay, so reading this again, and I'll read in the NKJV and the NLT. With the precious things of the earth and its fullness, and the favor of him who dwelt in the bush, right? And NLT, that same portion, it says, with the best gifts of the earth and its bounty, and the favor of the one who appeared in the burning bush, right? And that was the Most High, or that was the Lord. We know it was an angel, but it represented the Lord. And his favor would be what? That blessing. Let the blessing come upon the head of Joseph and upon the top of the head of him that was separated from his brethren, which was Joseph, as he was sold, into Egypt. Verse 17, his glory is like the firstling of his bullock. Now, here, as part of the blessing here, Moses likens um, Joseph, which is replying to Ephraim and Manasseh, as like the firstborn of a bull or an ox with strength and power. Okay, strong enough to basically drive away or back up or push the enemy. Basically back them up, right, to overpower them. And he says that in this in a form of an analogy, right? I'm gonna say it that way, or metaphorical form. So it says here, his glory is like the firstling of his bullock. The firstling is the firstborn, and his horns are like the horns of unicorns. Now, the horns are also symbolic of power. Okay, but here likening them to that bull, that strong bull, with the horns like the horns of a unicorn or of unicorns. When you go into that word unicorns, because there are other times in the scriptures where you would see unicorns or unicorn, which is referring, there are times when that's symbolic, right, of like say the internet, and there are times when it's talking about a type of ram, okay, which was like really, when you look into it, they'll say it's maybe not existent anymore or died off, but it wasn't like a flying Pegasus. So here, right, it says probably the great aurochs or wild bulls, which are now extinct, and they seem to have been known for really strong, like they were really strong, right, or had extreme strength. Let's see what it says here, Deuteronomy 33 and 17. A wild animal, fierce and untamed, resembling an ox, as a wild ass resembles an ass. It says here, possessed of horns, with which it prostrates everything and injures men. The animal is meant. The animal meant is doubtful. I have no hesitation in agreeing with, so on and so forth, such and such. So going back, it's likening him onto this, let's say this really strong ox or bull or ram. And it says here, with his horns, right? With them, he shall push the people together to the ends of the earth. And the word there, it's important to go into some of these words, right? Because when you go into the word push, the meaning of the word is more in a hostile sense, because it goes into same word that you see in the law concerning one whose ox, let's say his ox was known to push people in the past, and he didn't keep it home and it pushed somebody. That word push, nagach, which is to thrust, to push, to gore, right? To push at, to engage in thrusting, wage war, right? It says here, a primitive root to butt with the horns, figuratively to war against, to gore. So an ox or an animal with horns, when it gores you, it stabs you basically with its horns. Like when you see those wild bulls, and they run out there and then they use their horn to, like, pierce and lift. That's an example of pushing or goring somebody. So it's saying here that Joseph with his horns would gore, right? He shall push the people. The word there is I'm okay. I'm Yah would be my people, but I'm, one of the definitions there is also of nation, right? It can be used in the sense of your own people, but it can also be used in the sense of just nation or people. So as it says here, with them he shall push the people together to the ends of the earth, meaning he's going to drive them back, right, with his, or overpower them with his horn. And they are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh. So this is a part of his blessing, right? That he would have the power to basically drive back his adversaries. And if we read this here in the NLT, it says, Joseph has the majesty of a young bull. He has the horns of a wild ox. He will gore distant nations driving them to the ends of the earth. This is my blessing for the multitudes of Ephraim and the thousands of Manasseh. Verse 18, and of Zebulun he said, rejoice, Zebulun, in thy going out, and Issachar in thy tents, right? Which is that they would be, blessed, right? Zebulun in their going out, right? In their traveling and also in their habitation, and Issachar in their tents, right? In their dwelling places. They shall call, they shall call the people onto the mountain, which is the high place. There they shall offer sacrifices of righteousness, for they shall suck of the abundance of the seas, meaning they're gonna partake in the abundance of the seas and of the treasures hid in the sand, which is usually it's just going into in the earth, right, in the ground, and that's usually like your once again your riches, right, your gold and so on and so forth. And so that's why it mentions rejoice in your going out, right, and in your tents. And when you actually deal with it more so in Zebulon and Issachar in the future, right? There's actually a book which goes into it's called the Aborigines of the Western Hemisphere, and in there it goes into findings and studies of the natives that were here in the land and how and it mentioned I remember explicitly the tribe of Issachar, but along with the other tribes, associating them with some of their more modern names, like how you have Aztecs and Incas and so on. There were different names, I think one of them being like Yucatan and so on, or Yucatan, something like that. But they mentioned the association with Issachar, right, and some of the other tribes, and how even their sacrifices, okay, were that identical to that of the Jews that were over in the east, okay, because their customs and the things that they did was identical to that of the Jews that were in the east, and that's what made those those researchers and so on that came here believe that these Aborigines, right, the native inhabitants of this land were actually the 10 lost tribes. Okay, so even on this side, right, far into the future, they did. I mean, obviously they went off at points in time, but there were some things and some types of sacrifices and types of holy days that they kept that were reminiscent of that of the Israelites. Okay, and then obviously, their riches and so on and so forth that they were blessed with, which, it mentions Zebulon and Issachar, and it's not exclusive to just them, right? The bulk of the northern kingdom that were here did have the riches and the abundance of the seas, but there were some places that there were more than others, right? Based on your location on the land. Verse 20, and of Gad, he said, blessed is he that enlargeth Gad, right? And who enlargeth Gad? Enlargeth goes into like, actually like enlarging their land or their territory, right? And who did that? The Most High, right? Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai, via, a blessing. That's what it's saying, right? Blessed be he that enlargeth Gad. And it says here, he dwelleth as a lion and teareth the arm with the crown of the head. And this is likening the nature, right? The fierce and also dangerous warlike ability of Gad. Okay, and if we do a quick cross-reference, you'll notice it even there's a similar account relating to Gad. Yeah, here it is. First Chronicles 12:8. It says, and of the Gadites, there separated themselves unto David into the hold to the wilderness, men of might and men of war, fit for the battle, that could handle shield and buckler, whose faces were like the faces of lions, and were as swift as the roes upon the mountains. Okay, so once again, describing that their warlike ability that they would be blessed with, and that's why Esau had such a hard time when he, in this time, like later on, when he tried to conquer the tribe of Gad. But due to prophecy's sake, they had to lose. But during those wars, you can, when it says tear off the arm with the crown of the head, that's like a lion actually, like, ripping off, right? It's prey, tearing it apart. And when you look at the obviously the practical sense of how that played out for for a period of time when Esau was getting chewed out by Gad, that's what it would look like. Okay, until once again they got the upper hand. Verse 21, and he provided the first part for himself, because there in a portion of the lawgiver was he seated, and he came with the heads of the people. He executed the justice of the Lord and his judgments with Israel. Now the Old English makes it a bit more confusing, but it's really just saying that they got the best parts of the land for themselves. In the NLT it says, and also I think the NIV is also good here. Let's start with the NIV. It says, he chose the best land for himself. The leader's portion was kept for him. When the heads of the people assembled, he carried out the Lord's righteous will and his judgments concerning Israel. And when you look at the portion of Gad, that wasn't just given to them, they requested that, right? Along with Reuben, which was on the east of their of the land, all right, of the Jordan. Verse 21, and he provided, oh, I just read that actually. Verse 22, and of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's whelp. He shall leap from Bashan. Now, there isn't much here that's really said about Dan, right? But when you deal with what is said about Dan, a lion's whelp, like a lion's cub or a young lion, and Bashan, right, was a region that, as part of the livestock that was there, included lions. Okay, and why? Because of all the herd and cattle that would come there to graze and so on. So you would have, oftentimes lions in that region that would, leap or pounce upon their prey over there. And here Moses likens Dan, right, to like a lion that leaps upon its prey. Okay, and when you look at, for example, some of the things that they ended up doing, right, like the conquering of, I believe the city was Laish, where for Dan eventually felt like their territory was too small, right? And so in the book of Judges, I think it's Judges 18, it goes into that they scouted out, the land, and then they found a region, which I think was the city of Laish, where it was isolated by itself. Okay, and so when they strategized on it, they ended up just coming down suddenly upon those people and taking it over right after scouting it. So kind of like that attribute or that trait, like how you could see them being likened onto that lion, right, that waits for its right opportunity and then just pounces down on its prey. One example being what they did as when they took over that city. Okay, but when you read in the scriptures there, you start to see less and less of the tribe of Dan, right, after the book of Judges going on. So there isn't much account, right, of the different things that they would do to exemplify this blessing. But I'd say that's one of the things that you can look at, in this comparison here. And even some of the things with Samson, right, who was a Danite. But as it says here, verse 23, and of Naphtali, he said, O Naphtali, satisfied with favor and full with the blessings of the Lord, meaning they would be so blessed that they would be satisfied with favor. Imagine that, right? And as it says, be made full with the blessings of the Lord. Possess thou the west and the south. Now, the land of Naphtali itself in ancient Israel, it was, you could say it was somewhat west, but it wasn't really south. Okay. The people of Naphtali being modern day, I believe it's Chile and what's the other? What's the other name? Argentina? Is it? Let me just confirm that real quick. I believe my memory serves me right, but let's always double check that. Yeah, Argentina and Chile. And when you look at that on the map, it's now really, right, more so in the future that they came to possess, or the land in which they came to possess was considered, was it west, right, and the south, right, which is fruitful, it's beneficial for them, right? And when you look at that, it's South America, right? But it's on the western hemisphere, and really furthest south of all the regions in the Western Hemisphere, right? If you pull up a map of South America, you'd see it. It says here, and of Asher, he said, let Asher be blessed with children. Okay, letting them be fruitful. Let him be acceptable to his brethren, right? Let him be esteemed by his brethren, and let him dip his foot in oil. Now, oil in general, when you look at that, it can be symbolic of being very resourceful, but also dealing with oil itself, right, which is a natural resource. Now, modern day, the modern day region where the Asherites dwell by bulk is Brazil, right? Which when you go into the breakdown of the 12 tribes, you'll see that Asher is aligned with Brazil, right? Brazilians and so on. And a part of one of the main resources that they have there is also what oil. So when it says let him dip his foot in oil, it's referring to that their blessing being those resources, which is in their habitation where they would be dwelling. Okay, and guess what? Oil does not fall from the sky now, does it? And your foot is not, when you walk, you're not inverted. You're walking. Your foot is closer to the earth, right? That means beneath you. All right, and that's where you would get your oil from. And when you look that up, when you look at Brazil, if you just look up natural resources of Brazil, you'll notice, right, that they have a lot of oil, right, and natural gas and coal and so on and so forth. That was a part of their blessing. So it isn't by coincidence that some of these tribes ended up, settling in these different parts of the land. Okay, because beforehand, they didn't know, right? When at this time when Moses gave them this blessing, it's not like they understood that this was a good thing. Okay, yeah, you would be blessed with such and such, but at what point the Lord would, make this blessing fully come to pass, right? That was really up to the Lord, but we can see it all now. So verse 25, it says, "Thy shoes shall be iron and brass, and as thy days, so shall be thy strength." And thy shoes being iron and brass, it's also metaphorical, right? It's not like they're actually making shoes of iron and brass, but it's similar to how his foot dipping his foot in oil. It's not literal per se, but they would have these resources in their habitation. Okay, being iron and brass and other resources, which Brazil, also has, right? Iron and bronze and all these other kinds of minerals and resources, not exclusive to just that, but they have that. Okay. Um, it says here, "As thy days, so shall thy strength be," which means that, let them be blessed with strength all their days. Okay, I forgot one of the translations I looked at that had it worded pretty well. I think it was NET, right? It says, the second part, it says, "And may you have lifelong strength," right? So as thy days, the days in which you live, so shall your strength be, right? May you retain your strength all your days. Verse 26, "There is none like unto the God of Jeshurun," which is the God of Israel, "who rideth upon the heaven in thy help." All right. That is, from his chariot, in thy help, being that he is our helper. Okay. "And in his excellency on the sky." That's his majesty, because the Lord travels in the heavens, right? In the skies, even when he sends his angels and so on and so forth, it's through the skies, and it's usually through their chariots, which the scriptures refer to as clouds. Verse 27, "The eternal God is thy refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He shall thrust out the enemy from before thee, and shall say, Destroy them." Okay, and underneath meaning, let me just read it here. NLT, "The eternal God is your refuge. His everlasting arms are under you," meaning like he would bear you, right, to protect you. "He drives out the enemy before you. He cries out, Destroy them. Israel then shall dwell in safety alone." All right, meaning that we would be protected but isolated, right? Meaning not having our land invaded or inhabited, or being in fear of the nations round about us. "The fountain of Jacob," which just represents Israel or the Israelites, "shall be upon a land of corn and wine." And what does that symbolize? Abundance, right? Corn from your ground, your grain, and wine from your vineyards. "Also his heavens shall drop down dew," which would be the Just as you have rain, you also have dew. And what does dew do? Dew nourishes your land, okay, which gives you that increase. As the Lord did when you go back to the book of Genesis, even before it rained. Verse 29, happy art thou, O Israel, who is like unto thee, O people saved by the Lord, the shield of thy help, which is the Lord, and who is the sword of thy excellency, the Lord, and thine enemies shall be found liars unto thee. Now, when you actually go into that word, liars, one of the definitions there is to fail. Okay, so all of our enemies that may have looked, so fierce and dangerous, right? Is that kachash, to deceive, to lie, fail, right? Be disappointing, grow lean, be untrue, insufficient. So they're gonna fail, they're gonna fall before us, right? To cringe. So it says here to be untrue, to lie, to feign, to disappoint, fail, cringe, right? To fail. So what was that? Lying, submit selves. Okay, and this is going into the adversaries or our enemies basically being subject under us. Okay, falling and failing before us. It says, and thou shalt tread upon their high places. And that's going to be through the spirit and power of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, right? As we would tear down their places of worship, right? Their places of reverence, and ultimately symbolizing us subjecting the nations under us. Okay, and that brings us to the end of the book of Deuteronomy, the 33rd chapter, and the blessings in which Moses blessed the nation of Israel. So with that, Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rachak Wadash. Until next time, Shalom.